welcome everybody to our National Patient and Family Engagement Learning and Action Network Caregiver Peer Connection Call. We appreciate you joining us today as we learn from our fellow caregivers. We've assembled a panel of end-stage renal disease kidney care partners to share their experience as it relates to their kidney disease caregiver journey. So you may be able to relate to some of these topics discussed today, and our hope is that you gather techniques and inspiration that you can incorporate into your own lives. Before we get started, there are a few items we'd like you to remember. Let's see here. Okay. Sorry about that. So we do ask for you to please keep your line muted throughout this call. We are going to have a few folks come off as panelists, but we will have an opportunity towards the end for you to ask any questions you have. Please be respectful when asking questions and be mindful of not speaking over somebody else. We also ask you to take the call in a quiet location and mute your line again. But if you do come off mute, then we can hear just you and not your background noise. This call, as usual, is being recorded, and we will make it public on our NCC website. And we will also promote it on social media. So folks who are unable to attend or who are interested in learning more are able to do so. We do ask that you please do not disclose any personal identifiable information. Do not share any information that you would not want to make public, such as your date of birth or the name of your dialysis facility, due to us sharing this out to the public. Please also do not ask for medical advice. The role of our panelists is to share their personal experience. We will have to interject if you are asking for medical advice, and we encourage you to please direct any questions to your medical team. And just a reminder that each person's situation and experience is unique. So the treatment plan for each patient is unique to their personal needs, and various factors, including other medical conditions, need to be taken into consideration. Before you make any changes to your health practices, please speak with a member of your healthcare team. All right, so that's all our housekeeping. Our disclaimer, please remember that the views and opinions expressed during this call are those of the panelists and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the ESRD NCC or the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Any content that is provided by the panelists is of their opinions and is not intended to substitute for professional medical advice, diagnoses, or treatment. And always, please seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding medical conditions. We see some people are coming on the call. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Please do mute your line when you join. So your moderators today, my name is Emma. I'm the Patient and Family Engagement Manager for the ESRD National Coordinating Center. I will serve as one of your moderators for today's discussion, and joining me is Miss Stephanie. Stephanie, if you'd like, I'll pause for a moment for you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. It's so nice to see what a great group we have today. A lot of participation, so I'm very anxious to, hear our speakers today. Emma, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we have two amazing panelists today, Miss Katie McAllister and Verneeky Jackson. Going to first introduce Katie McAllister. She's a former care partner from Lexington, Virginia. She was a care partner for her son as he navigated the stages of ESRD and transplant. He is now doing well post-transplant in 2018 and is living on his own. Katie has been part of the Patient and Family Advisory Committee for 4 years, and this is her 3rd year as part of the Vaccination Affinity Group. Welcome, Katie. Thank you so much for joining us and being one of our panelists today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. And I will go ahead and introduce Verneeky as well. She is a care partner for her mother since June of 2012. She is a home health personal care aide and has worked in administrative management, the armed force leadership, as a cashier and caterer, a court-appointed special advocate for children, an elementary high school instructional assistant, social services intern. She's worked in the food, customer, and military services, and she's been in hospitality supervision. Hopefully I got all those for you, Verneeky. It's very impressive. Her hobbies include baking, cooking, traveling, spending time with family and friends, writing, and so many more. And she's been with us at the NPFE-LAN since January of 2021. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's see. Verneeky, are you able to hear us okay?
Yes, I can hear you well.
Perfect.
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. Nice to see your face.
Nice to see yours as well.
So with that, we are going to just jump right into our discussion. We have some questions that we want to ask both Katie and Verneeky before we open up the call to the audience to ask questions. So Katie, I'm going to start with you. If you'd like to just tell us a little bit more about yourself and your journey as a caregiver.
My son was 11 when he was diagnosed with IgA nephropathy. And when they're 11, it's easy because you make the appointment and you take them to the doctor and you get their medicine and they do what they're told. It gets a little harder when they're upper teens and in college, and he probably did not follow up as he was supposed to so much in college. And the disease took over and he came home for Christmas vacation and was referred for transplant. And luckily he was transplanted very quickly after a not very successful trial in home dialysis. But he has done well since. It's harder when they're that age because they don't want to listen to mom. And so I know probably there's more care partners that are spouses, and I don't know, maybe he wouldn't listen either. But you do what you can, and sometimes it's frustrating, but it was very rewarding, and he is doing well, and is out on his own now, and he is following the doctor's orders. He's getting his medicines and following up with his appointments, so it's going well.
Thank you. We appreciate your unique perspective, as you mentioned, as a mother, but also just starting at such a young age as being that caregiver. So we appreciate your story. And Verneeky, same question for you. If you just tell us a little bit about you and how you came into your role as a caregiver. Oh, and you are on mute, I think, Verneeky. There you go.
Got it. Sorry. Well, my role as a care partner started right after I came off of active duty. I had found out about my mother becoming ill, about her conditions worsening, the ones that were already existing and that she was being treated for, and found out that they were a trigger to the kidney disease later on. So it was a great thing that I had finished my tour and I was going to decide what it was I wanted to do, go back into one of my old career fields or do something brand new. And so this left me with an easy choice, but it was unfortunate how it came to pass. So I decided, hey, how about healthcare? Why not now? And helping my mother would be ideal. So this was in March of 2009 when I came off active duty, and the decision was already made for me. I decided that I should be the one to step up to do it. I was actually already contracted in a position beforehand, but I resigned and dedicated myself to making sure that she was well taken care of. And I also wanted to be an advocate for her as well with her team of healthcare providers. So that's exactly what I did.
Great. Thank you so much for all of that background. And it sounds like both of you had a pretty, natural progression into becoming a caregiver. It was set up for you, Verneeky, and for Katie just as being a mom. But I
Yes.
wonder how you both coped with adjusting to this role of being a very specific caregiver during this time. And I'll start with you, Verneeky.
Yes. It kind of was natural. That's the best word that I can use to describe it. It wasn't anything that I really had to think hard about and decide. This decision was already made when I found out about her illness. And it just so happens that, hey, I did want to go into healthcare eventually, but that just speeded my path along after I found out about that. So,
Great, thank you. And Lisa, for you, how did you cope with adjusting to this new level of caregiving role?
the cope was actually challenging. I mean, I was able to adapt well, just like being in the military. I looked at it as, hey, this was my career field for this amount of time, and I had to follow orders. I had to be flexible. So the coping was challenging as reference to crossing over from military to the civilian lifestyle again. But it wasn't a very difficult thing to do after I had gotten accustomed to focusing on the health care of my mother, focusing on her overall well-being. And I was just like, okay, so I've just got to take the term partner literally, just be open to tagging along, transporting her, the housekeeping and the cooking. That was something that she had raised me up to know how to do well. And I adjusted based on what I already learned growing up and what I had to bring from my other career fields. So with that being said, it wasn't truly difficult. It was a challenge based on the reason why I had to do it, because I know that her health was failing. But other than that, it wasn't too bad. I just really didn't like to see her that way.
Absolutely. I love your use of the word as a partner. That's wonderful.
Yes, I definitely am her partner.
And Katie, I'll go over to you. Same question about how you coped.
When he was younger, it was just something that he had, and it didn't cause an. It was just kind of a benign disease. He would show symptoms if he was sick, but we kept up with his visits, and so it really wasn't bad until it got really bad. And he was heading off to college. He was transferring schools, and he was headed to Alaska, and it was about a week before he was supposed to go when things got really bad and he was hospitalized. And we didn't know if he was going to go to school. It was very scary. He didn't want much help from me because he was, in his early 20s at that point. But it needed someone to navigate, and he was not the best at keeping track of things. So there was some push and pull with feeling like, it was his disease, but I had to kind of be in charge because somebody needed to be in charge. And but he got on. He was able to go on to school that term, and then when he came home at Christmas is when they said that he was going to need the transplant, and he couldn't go back until after. So during the surgery, he was it naturally needed somebody to take care of him, and he was home at the time so that we could. And I don't know, young men just don't like a lot of mothers. stuff, and I'm a little controlling. So, but he let me help, and slowly he started taking over everything on his own, and so we made a good team. And I think after the fact, he even said that that it was good that I was helping. Sometimes it gets frustrating, and when it did, I would run, and that's what I do. So I started running a lot.
That's great. So that's how you coped, is you
Yeah.
physical activity, you ran.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. It sounds like despite how frustrating it got, you did a really great job of trying to support him how he needed to be supported, which can be challenging.
And I was in a good position to do that. I had been a stay-at-home mom, and once the kids went back to college, I still didn't go back to work. So I had that ability to do everything that I needed to do without shifting schedules, and it would have been very difficult had I been working, at least initially. So it has worked out well.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you. I wonder what is something that you wished you had known ahead of time about being a caregiver, care partner to someone with kidney disease?
Me,
Yeah.
someone in another one of these conferences said this, and it really stuck with me. And I don't remember the woman that said it, but that it's for life. That a transplant isn't it isn't a permanent fix. And at his age, we feel like it is because he's young and he's healthy, but then your brain takes over, and it's not. So maybe if I had known that initially, I wouldn't have thought, oh, this is gonna fix everything. It's gonna fix everything. And it has. And we're very thankful. But I need to remember that it might not always be that way. And just to keep watching for signs that there's any sort of a problem. And we had really good support. He was at University of Virginia, and they were great with providing information. So I feel like I wasn't lacking any medical information. They were great. But sometimes, I guess I had to realize it wasn't my disease, and I wasn't in charge. I could say these are the things you need to take, and this is what you've got to do. But ultimately, he wasn't going to be with me forever, and it was up to him to take over.
Thank you. Those are some powerful statements of what you've learned and what you would have liked to known. For you, Verneeky, what would you have liked to know before becoming a care partner for a kidney patient?
Well, one thing I really would have liked to know, and I wish I was well prepared for, was the amount of hospitalizations that she had right before they actually found out exactly what was wrong. I mean, she had been admitted several times in that same year, and we just knew something was most definitely wrong. And it was just having to adjust to her being in that setting repeatedly. And then you know how it is when there's a patient there. The first thing that comes to your mind is, along with what's wrong, is how long they're going to be admitted, and what will the treatments be, and will it be something that they will actually be able to their body will be able to accept, and that they'll be able to survive through. So all of that was going on in my mind at one time. And that was the hardest thing for me, in reference to just adjusting to the role. And the other thing that you ask about in reference to, um, I'm sorry,
Well, that's okay. Take your time.
in reference to, oh, and the one I'm speaking of just came out of the dialysis center. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I can
Okay.
jump back to Katie if you needed to take a second.
I'm about to get a little tearful just thinking about it, actually. But I'm gonna be okay. Um, I hope I'm answering the question.
You're doing great.
Uh, Can you give it to me one more time to make sure I answer you accurately? The last thing
Sure.
that you.
Yeah, and I think you've done a really great job so far. The question was just what was something you wished you had known ahead of time about caregiving to someone with kidney disease?
Okay, so I was on it. Yeah, just the preparation for the hospitalization and what type of treatments they might have to receive. Like in some, after a couple of her discharges, she had to receive additional care at home to where there was a nurse assigned that had to come out and give her some more treatment. I had to adjust to that. And I also wanted to know how to adjust to um, just having to be the one to receive all of that news. You know, it's a lot to take in and take on at one time. And it doesn't matter how much preparation you actually do or how much advice you actually receive, you can never be prepared for a loved one having failing health and having to have multiple hospitalizations and having multiple diagnoses and conditions. I don't think you could do enough to prepare your mind and body for that. And it was just so heavy on me because I had remembered my mother younger being without any diagnosis, no medications, not having to have that many hospitalizations, and not having a team of healthcare providers. I remember just being one PCP, not completely regular visits, once every 6 months or a year. And I remember her not having to come to dialysis treatment in center, being on that machine for a few hours, a couple of times a week. So I just wish that there was some type of preparation mode that I would have had. That's the main thing that I wish I would have known beforehand.
Thank you. That was a lot of great information, and you got towards some of our next questions about how healthcare providers can help patients and families feel more comfortable when they are, becoming caregivers, stepping into this big role. Sounds like for you, just more information would have been helpful.
Yes.
And maybe a little bit more consistency in the providers that you saw.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what I mean.
Okay, great. And Katie, for you during your, prime years of being caregiver for your son, was there anything that you would have liked to have from healthcare providers to feel more comfortable, more prepared in your care partner role?
It's a really good question. I feel like the doctors that he had were always really well versed in communication with parents. At first, he was with pediatric nephrology at UVA, and then we transitioned into the adult. And so the doctors always were very open. We knew this was a possibility once things started getting bad. And then especially once he was referred for transplant, they were great providers of information. I really can't think of anything that they didn't tell us that I wish that I had known at the time.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah, and then when he, just his family doctor, we're in a small town, there wasn't even a pediatrician, but when he first showed signs of this and we went in, the doctor said, I know what this is. And he said, and we're going to send him to UVA, and these are the tests they're going to run. So we're going to get them started now. And so really, I don't have any thought of anything that any medical professional could have done differently. When he was referred for dialysis, it was like a Friday night, and someone from the center called, and they knew he was a 23-year-old college kid, and they facilitated with a surgeon out of town to put a port in for home dialysis immediately, knowing that he probably should take care of this himself and not go to the center initially. Yeah, people really opened doors and facilitated things, and I can't say enough good things about all the people that we had.
That's amazing. I'm so glad to hear that
Mhm.
you had that support. I wonder, another thing that Verneeky was getting at is, just the mental load of being a caregiver. How did you manage, what resources did you utilize in order to support your own mental health?
In order to support my own mental health, the resources I utilized was making sure that I was in the right state of mind to be able to handle all of this and to take on all of this responsibility. So I made sure that I sought a mental health professional to receive some counseling and therapy on my end. I said because in order to be able to take care of someone else, I had to make sure that I take care of myself, or that I'm well taken care of. And I know mental health would be a great way to go about it. So that's what I did. And I had the support of my women's group at Veterans Affairs. And we had, of course, we discussed all kinds of issues. But that was one great support system that I had. And I made sure that, along with caring for my mother, that the time that I had for myself, I made sure that, I ate nutritiously and kept my exercise routine up the same way I did when I was in the military. It's forced, and you have to exercise every day, or road march, whatever we're doing. But I just made sure that I incorporated that fitness, eating healthy, and just having some relaxation time is also helpful. If you're able to do that one thing that you love for a few hours at a time, maybe reading a book, writing a short story, going for a nature walk or a hike, and you can just walk around in the mall if the weather conditions are not suitable outside.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to buy anything. You can just walk around and window shop. You can price things and just take a look at different items that they have in the store. And I like to tell a good joke every now and then. Nice, clean, and in fun. And I also like to watch some comedy movies, because those are things that keep you laughing. And so I incorporated all those things, and I believe that it has been a great help. It's some things that have helped to keep me strong, keep me going. And even when times get tough, I know I have something that I can rely on and pull from to help me and continue to keep going.
That's amazing. Thank you. I think we all got some new ideas today on how to incorporate some self-care from your list, and I appreciate you sharing those. You've got some people praising you here in the chat, and I wonder, Katie, I know you mentioned running,
Mm-hmm.
and I see you had a nice little furry friend join
Yes.
you for a minute.
Yeah, Ruby is my partner.
What other things did you do for your mental health, or resources did you utilize?
I tend to come unhinged and unglued, but I didn't want him to see that. So, my husband would see it, but he wouldn't. And this complicated the whole situation. During the testing to be a donor, my husband was found to have cancer. And so I had both of them, and my husband had his surgery first, and then he healed from his surgery, and my son had his surgery, and then 3 days later my husband started chemo. So actually my son saved my husband's life because we wouldn't have known the cancer. So then at that point I didn't really have anyone that I felt like I could, go cry to, because everybody was sick. But just trying to manage everyone, just trying to keep everything together.
Yeah.
That was a bad year. It was a really bad year. And then everybody got well. So in late 2018, that's where the dog came in, because I needed something else to take care of. So I got a puppy. Fixed everyone out. Everybody was well.
Thank you for sharing that, Katie. I know for both you and Verneeky, talking about some of these times can be really challenging and heavy. So I appreciate you all sharing that with us. And I'm glad you found a furry friend that's bringing you comfort, and
Yeah,
they're good for that.
my care partner. My
There you go.
used on training a dog.
Now, before I open it up to some questions from your fellow patients and family members, my last question for both of you, and I'll start with you, Katie, is what was or what has been the most enjoyable thing about being a care partner? Or what did you enjoy the most?
Oh, seeing how well he did after surgery, when the doctor came in from the operating room and said, he's already produced, I don't know how many liters of urine, which this community would understand, but most people probably wouldn't. But that was a really big deal. It was working immediately. And so yes, he was in pain, and yes, it took a lot of adjustment getting used to the medicines, but knowing that it worked right away was definitely the high point.
That's amazing. Thank you. And Verneeky, for you, what is or what has been the most enjoyable part about being a care partner?
For me, the most rewarding thing about being a caregiver is, kind of piggybacking off Katie, just being able to spend that undivided time and give undivided attention to I got company, I'm sorry. Just being able to spend that one-on-one time with her. I consider it to be mother and daughter bonding, actually. My mother and I have always been close. And the fact that this happened, I'm not taking this, lightly or for granted, but I just see the situation as a way to, get more quality time with her, to share my compassion and remind her that I have that and I have a commitment to her. And, I can be around. The best part of it is I can always be around when she goes to see her providers. I can listen in to what they're saying to her, and I don't have to question her about it when she comes home. I'm right there. And it's wonderful because when they speak, I can understand what they're saying. And if there's a question that I have about maybe a medication or side effect from medication, I can ask them right then and there. I don't have to call them later or email them later about it. So it's convenient to be a partner. And I couldn't think of a person that I would rather spend that much time in my life with besides my mother. Unless I had a spouse, of course. But yeah, I feel like I'm giving back to her something, some of what she gave to me. I can never repay her for her sacrifice. Yes, I realize that, but I feel like I'm doing something and I'm making a big difference in her life just by being there. So that's the most rewarding part of it for me.
It's amazing. Thank you so much for that. We have lots of people who are sending out emojis, and we've got some fans in the chat. So thank you so much for sharing that. We do have a couple minutes for some questions if you all are okay with that. I'll open it up to the rest of the meeting. If you have any questions for either Verneeky or Katie, you're welcome to either use the chat or come off mute. And as people are thinking, we did have one come through from Sarah for Miss Katie. She was just wondering how long your son has had the kidney for.
It was in 18, so 5 years. Yeah, he was 5 years in April.
Wonderful, thank you.
And he it used to be the labs, what Verneeky was saying, understanding the jargon, reading the labs, knowing what the medications were. And so I would get the labs and I would know what everything was. And now they go to him and I'm like, well, what were your labs? He's like, they're fine. I said, but what were they? They're fine. They're fine. So I hope they're fine.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or thoughts for either Verneeky or Katie?
Yeah, I'd like to know, as a caregiver, what were some of the things that you had to give up, or did you have to give up any?
Who's that for me? Is it for me or Katie?
Either of you.
We can start with you,
Oh,
Verneeky, if you want. Thanks, Anthony.
Well, Mr. Anthony, do you want to go first, Katie? Or?
You go ahead. You go.
Okay, I didn't want to jump out in the line. The first thing that comes to my mind when you ask that question is what I had to give up in order to become a care partner. The only thing at the time I had to give up is the position I was working in, and I was a contractor. So it was I think it was a federal government position, but it was intermittent. It was just something that I was, doing a few hours a day. So it wasn't a really big sacrifice to give that up. I just resigned and I communicated with my mother's healthcare providers. And the attending physician that was caring for her at her last hospital visit told me that she needed someone to watch her 24/7. The bottom line was to prevent her from going into a nursing facility or assisted living. And that was something that I did not want her to have to endure. So I have other siblings, but of the rest of us, I was the most available one because I had just came off of an active duty military tour before that. So it just everything just fit right into place.
Okay. And what about
So
you,
it
Katie?
wasn't too hard for me to get that done. And that's something that I was willing to do for either one of my parents.
Okay,
Thank you, Verneeky.
thank you.
Katie?
I really did because I was already home. There really wasn't anything that I had to give up. If I had been working, it would have been a lot of time off, which I'm sure would have happened and does for other families. We were just in a position that I was available, and so there really weren't any changes for us, which was good. And I was able to devote all my time to him. Not that, he may not have wanted it, but he got it for that time.
Did any of you have to modify your social activity?
We didn't have to modify social activity. Because he was home, we did have to, before the transplant, we had to modify our diets, so that we were all eating a kidney-friendly diet. And my husband was losing all this weight, and he thought it was because of the kidney diet, but it was actually because he had cancer. So, a lot of things came into play there. But no, because he was, he could take care of himself. He didn't need constant hands-on care, so it didn't really affect what we could do.
Thank you.
Yes, that's very interesting that Katie mentioned that. I was thinking along those same lines, Mr. Anthony, and to answer your question. I didn't have to do a lot of lifestyle changes in reference to caring for my mother, because the way I was working before I started helping her, besides the part-time, I came off of full-time active duty orders. So in the military, they taught us to be able to transition, adapt to your environment, adjust to change rapidly. And that was a part of what I had been doing my whole career. So when it was time to care for her, it was just, I had to change from military environment to civilian. And with that being said, that was the biggest challenge. Other than that, because I was familiar with my mother being my parent, I was used to the role of her being my personal leader before going into the military. So when I came out, I just said, hey, I'm just going to humble myself and be there for her. So, and in reference to dieting and any other activities, eating a kidney-friendly diet, that was easy too, because in the military we had square meals. We didn't eat multiple meals during the day. On our own time, we still had to keep our fitness level up, even if we had days off. So, no, it wasn't hard for me to adjust to the transition of helping her. My activities, I just incorporated whatever I was doing into that lifestyle.
Thank you. Thank you for those questions. Did you have anything else to add, Anthony?
Would you guys recommend caregiving to, others? Just for the benefits or, any of that? Or were there any ways that it actually enriched your life as being a caregiver? And would you continue on with it, even if it was with a stranger?
It enriched mine because I think it was a really strong bonding experience for my son and me. But it was, I think for me, it was because it was a family member, and I would always take care of my children, but I don't, I wouldn't, I would help someone through it, but I can't see that it would be like a long-term job that I would do. It was because it was, I don't want to, forced isn't the right word, because that makes it sound like something you didn't want to do. And of course I wanted to help my son, but it was because he was my child.
That's a really great point. Thanks for making that, Katie, and being so honest about that.
Yes. Yes, I agree with Katie. In reference to doing it long term, Not a problem because it's my mother. Even if it had been another family member, still wouldn't be a problem. I feel like I mentioned before, I feel like parents, they have a hierarchy in your life. And I just feel like just growing up, there's a certain amount of respect that you're supposed to be taught for those that are overseeing your care. That's exactly what my mother was doing coming up. But now that the tables are turned, I just feel like I owe it to her. I feel like that's the least that I can do. And yes, I would do it permanently, long term, for the rest of her life. We already had these discussions. It's funny that you brought that up, Mr. Anthony. We've talked about this before. I told her even when I get married, move on, have my children and my own family, I said I still would do it. It wouldn't be about any, the benefit for me would to be just to make sure that my mother was well taken care of, and I, one of her children, being the one that's by her side, I'm seeing her through all of this.
Love that, Verneeky.
Yeah, thank you. That's amazing. Natasha, I see that your hand has been raised. Did you have something to add? Oh, I see she is typing, so maybe not.
One more question.
Okay, sure, go ahead, Anthony.
Was there ever a time when you were caring for the individuals, were there ever times where they were intensely combative?
Yes.
And how did you guys handle that?
It was probably more after the transplant. Just some frustration after. But you just try to talk through it, and then things calm back down. It wasn't an ongoing, it was never an ongoing battle. So I guess probably I would say, maybe I should say no, because it wasn't an ongoing daily issue. He thought he was going to be in college and finishing college and on his own, and suddenly he's home with mom, and then COVID hit and he's back home. And so some frustrations from that, but never really anything that was ongoing and combative.
Katie sharing that.
Well, I finally got my mic on. Everybody, I'm Natasha Russell. Oh, I don't know if you guys know my story. It's too long to tell. However, for those who don't have caregivers, is there any way that we could possibly donate or build a mentorship or program of people like me who want to educate, who want to go in and tell people who don't know? Because the majority of the time they spend 2 to 3 years. I know the first time I was on dialysis, I spent 2.5 years and nobody ever said anything to me about a transplant or anything. So I'm just wondering, when do we start educating, and how can we start educating? Like people like us, people like us who've been through it, navigated the system, done it. How can we implement some type of education in Central?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Natasha. Thank you for posing that. A good place to start is your network. A lot of the networks have some variation of a peer mentor program. Majority of them, I would guess, are using people who are currently dialyzing, but some of the networks, some of the companies, they do have other programs where they do look for people to come in provide support. A lot has changed since COVID, and so it's really going to depend on the specific policies of where you live and where you're hoping to provide education. But I think I would recommend starting with your network, starting with your local clinic, and just brainstorming with what they already have currently in place, because I can imagine they're probably looking for people who are as interested as you are, because it can be hard to find people who want to share their knowledge.
That makes me so sad that it was never brought up to you in 2.5 years as a possibility. Have you had a transplant at this point? You had two.
My first transplant lasted 18 years. And then the second, I had to wait 6 years for the second one because I began to be an advocate. I started to see I was on a hamster wheel and they were just running up the Medicare. They weren't ever going to test me or put me on the list. So when they started getting absurd and my doctor was telling me that this is the world's smallest violin when I'm telling him I'm dying, and then he puts his arms out and says, these are the hoops you're going to have to jump through well, needless to say, I fired him. I fired him and I got a second opinion. I was transplanted 8 months later in Baylor at Texas. I just left my state, Oklahoma, who wouldn't even consider. And I went to Texas and I got transplanted in 8 months, just on the 11th of last month. So it's a lot that I've been studying into this and going into this and talking to other patients. Even when I was in center, I was still talking to patients that didn't even know. They didn't even know about a transplant because nobody's even told them. 9 years. 9 years. There's
Natasha,
vaccine. I'm on vaccine committee, but I know that there is a transplantation committee with the subject matter experts. So I don't know if you're involved with that committee, but
no, but you can add me,
so
please.
what they do is create tools to try to encourage people to learn more about transplantation, and hopefully your center will get whatever tool they create that maybe will help them send people that way.
Well, I'm not in center anymore. Look, I go into the centers because I still have my fistula, and I go in and I ask them questions. So I go in and I say, I'm looking for a center, but I actually want to know what type of education do you give for transplants? And also, how long is your wait? I just ask them the questions that I wanted to know so that when I do start, because I just got my coach's license through the AKF. So I'll be hosting webinars and telling people, exactly what I did for the whole time, because I've had a lot of people who ask me, how are you still making it? And you've been on dialysis for 6 years. And I say, it's discipline. It's discipline and it's faith. I never lost my faith because I knew.
Natasha, I'm so sorry to cut you off. I wanted to point out in the chat before we move forward, I apologize. There's a few people that you might want to connect with, Sarah and Michael. They're talking about the National Kidney Foundation, and they have a SAPIR group too. And Sarah's actually part of the mentor. She's going through the mentor certification. So it may be very similar to what you did at AKF.
I'm on that as well.
Okay, perfect.
I'm
great.
On anything that has anything to do with ESRD, I am following up.
Okay. Well, we're going to go ahead and move forward. I apologize for cutting you all off. We've got about 5 more minutes.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. I apologize. A big thank you to Katie and Verneeky for sharing your story, sharing your insight. We clearly have some folks that are very interested in what you all have provided to the community. So we will have more of these calls, but a few more things just to kind of get through here. These are some other great resources that we currently have on our ESRD NCC website. So when you have an opportunity, we encourage you to make yourself familiar with the website. You can please share them with the community. They are open to the public. And this is also where we post these caregiver connection calls for folks to view them later. So again, that's esrdncc.org. And as many of you know, this is where we also post all of our resources that we're making in the affinity group, which oftentimes relate to caregiver or care partners as well. So it's a great location. I also did want to highlight one of our other resources. We do have a YouTube channel. and it has some really great interviews and podcasts. This one in particular that I am showing here on the screen, this caregiver talks about her role as a caregiver to her husband. And there's some really good insight as when she talks about her husband transitioning to home, having young children and pets in the home, and how her caregiver role transitioned over time. So very similar to some of the points you made, Katie. She talks about what that looked like over the course of many years. So if you haven't listened to this wonderful podcast with Yolanda Moore, I encourage you to hop onto our YouTube and check it out.
Okay.
Here are some of those resources that you can find online. So tips for kidney caregivers. This one was made by our patient's needs on understanding how dialysis makes me feel and how you can help. So it outlines how they possibly could feel post-dialysis and what would be helpful for them. So if you haven't checked those out, ESRDNCC.org. And again, we thank you all so much for being on today's call. I know this is our first one of the year, and we will be having another one in about 2 or 3 months in this series. You all asked some very great thought-provoking questions of our panelists. We hope those were answered. If you have any follow-up questions, please reach out to us at the email on the screen and we'll get those answered for you.
Excellent.
And then a huge thank you to the Katie and Verneeky for sharing your stories. We very truly appreciate your time with us today.
Thank
So
you.
that is all we have today. Thank you all so much again for joining us and have a great rest of your evening.
You for having me.
Have a
Thank
good one,
you.
everyone. Take care. Be safe.
Bye.
Thanks, Tasha.